Good evening, Baltimore. This is Angelette Aviles. I want to talk about what Governor Wes Moore just introduced yesterday. It's legislative session and season right now. So this is, we're always following what's going on in Annapolis on a daily basis. But he introduced a legislation called the Enough Act. It's short for Engaging Neighborhoods, Organizations, Unions, Governments, and Household Act of 2024. Wow, that's long. And it's going to create a grant program that feeds public funding and money provided by the private sector and philanthropies, as well as, like I said, public funding, to basically combat generational poverty. And I feel like I've heard this over and over again. Basically, it's, for me, I'm asking, how does the state solve that income disparity? Is it the government? Is the government the proper institution to solve that? That's my question. And I don't want to divulge everything with my thoughts, but I wanted someone else to shed some light on this. Someone who may have some bolder ideas is the former vice presidential candidate and founder of the nonprofit You Are the Power, Spike Cohen. How are you?
I'm doing great, Angelette. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. And I know you're a Baltimore native, so I was like, we got Spike on tonight.
I am born in Baltimore, yes.
So what are your thoughts on this? I know I shot you the article and everything, and is the government going to solve this problem?
I'm not doing what they're saying they're going to do. I mean, the governor is right. All the stats he gives tell a story. The problem is the story is the opposite of what he wants it to say. The story is that the Maryland government, with the help of the federal government, and I guess the Baltimore government locally to Baltimore as well, have spent more money per recipient, per student, per patient, however you want to split it, than almost anywhere else in the country, and is suffering some of the worst outcomes as a result of that spending. If you look at the areas where the most so-called poverty or welfare spending is being had, it's causing there to be more poverty because they're actually subsidizing the behaviors that lead to not just generational poverty, but also crime and lower educational outcomes and everything else. They're actually funding the problem to make it worse.
Yeah. And now he goes on, and I'll play a soundbite of this later on, but he suggests that the best group of people to solve this poverty is at the community level, and he calls them elders. I'm trying to find the exact word, but he refers them as the elders in the community, and utilizing them to provide the information and knowledge. But I'm thinking, isn't that what elected officials are for, like city councilmen and delegates? And I feel like he wants to create this like another level of bureaucracy here with that. What are your thoughts on this? I mean, yeah, I'm a big believer on bottom up solutions, but it's like it's still grant money going to the community in some shape or form.
Yeah, bottom-up solutions don't come from top-down funding, right? So, I mean, you can say it's happening at the community level, but the money's coming from the top, which means it's coming with strings attached, which means it's going to be like every other spending program. It's going to spend a bunch of money and either not make anything better or potentially make it worse. But to your point, there wasn't a tremendous amount of detail here in what I've read about this Enough program. But anytime they start talking about directing where the money's going to go and quote unquote working with local charities and grant writers and so forth, very often that turns into the state government directing private money, saying that the charities and the funds that are trying to help people in Maryland and in Baltimore need to spend it the way that they want them to spend it, with kind of an implicit threat in there that if they don't, that things aren't going to go their way. It sounds like a protection racket for the charities. But all that to say, I think if he really wanted the elders of the community to be involved, the best way you could do that is to stop taxing them into oblivion and let them decide where they want their own money to go.
Yeah, we have a problem with taxes here in Maryland. I don't think we have a budget crisis. We have a spending crisis, and folks here are taxed to oblivion, and they're leaving. They're leaving the city. They're leaving the state. And that's how we have these vacant home problem too here in Baltimore as well. And they want to spend here, about a month ago, Mayor Brandon Scott proposed $3 billion to, rebuild these vacant homes. And I'm like, but really? We're the people.
They wouldn't have to spend a penny to revitalize anything if they created conditions by which people would actually want to move there who have money. That's the absurd part of all of this, Angela. Like, anytime the government starts talking about we're going to revitalize things, what they're really saying is we're going to take money from producers and spend it as we see fit. And even worse yet, when it comes to so-called welfare spending, what they're saying is we are going to subsidize the kinds of behaviors and outcomes that lead to poverty and crime and all the things that we're saying we want to get rid of. Mm-hmm. When you subsidize someone for creating a single parent fatherless home, you are ensuring in a roundabout way, incentivizing, whether intentionally or unintentionally, you're incentivizing the kind of household that is most likely to produce people that are not going to do well in school. They are going to be more likely to have a life of crime. They're going to be more likely to end up in prison, and they themselves are more than likely to end up on welfare. I mean, we know this, and yet they continue to fund these types of things. And in doing so, they're putting the bill on job creators and producers who then leave. So they're making things worse on both ends. And we see how that plays out. The poverty rate in Baltimore is roughly 20% and has been that way for many years. That's nearly double the national average. It's not working.
Yeah, this reminds me of a book by Robert Lupton. It's called Toxic Charity, and how churches and charities hurt those that they help. But when I read this, it was like, but the government does the same thing. They give once, and then people elicit appreciation. The second time, people are anticipating this. The third time, you create expectation from people. The fourth time, it becomes entitlement. And then by the fifth time, you establish dependency, and it's just an ever-ending cycle.
Exactly. And in the case of charity, if the people giving to the charity think it's not very effective and isn't working well, they can choose to stop giving to it. In the case of a government program, no such luck. The only way you can stop giving to it is leaving, and that's what's happening. They're leaving. If they really wanted to help, if they wanted to spend money or reallocate money in a way that would, as he put it, direct it where it's needed, he would push for school choice. I mean, what is it? Roughly half of Baltimore schools, not a single student was proficient in anything. Mm-hmm. That's insane, despite the fact that Baltimore schools are the fourth highest funded of any metro area. Students are getting something like $21,000 per student. It was increased 16% in the last year. Now, imagine if the parents, the ones who actually cared about their children's education, were allowed to use all or some of that education money in the school of their choice instead of being segregated into proven multi-decade, multi-generation failing schools. That would help with generational poverty a lot more than spending more money on failed programs that clearly have not worked.
Yes, and I want to bring up education because I know Tori, and I know you know Tori Snow. He brought this earlier today, and one of the callers said, the best way to combat poverty is through education. Yeah. And Governor Moore, if you heard the soundbite in the very beginning, he did talk about one in so many students, kids, this and that, and education. It's just like, okay, why don't we reform education? Because you just keep throwing money at it. Let's look at innovative ideas. I know you travel a lot throughout the country. Can you explain to our listeners maybe stuff that is working in other states, like open enrollment or ESAs or something like that?
I'm seeing it across the country, Angela. Anywhere where they are allowing even a small portion, sometimes it's not all, sometimes it's not even most, but even a small portion of that money to be directed to the schooling of the parents' choice, we see exponentially or far greater outcomes than we saw before from the exact same students. It's not like, that they're cherry picking the students. It is the parents choosing where within a certain level of radius, what schools that their kids can go to. And it just makes sense, right? Like if the schools know that they're going to get blank check funding, even if literally no one in the school is proficient at anything, then what's the incentive for them to improve? Mm-hmm. But if instead they know they're going to lose students and at least some of the funding tied to those students, well, now they actually have to perform. For the first time in God knows how many decades, they're actually going to have to compete. In fact, in the case of Baltimore, they probably never had to compete. It certainly shows. So that's definitely a really good thing. It's interesting watching the clip, listening to the clip of that speech, Angela, because the governor is giving all of these stats, and he's talking about how one in however many fails and one in however many isn't proficient, and then he says, and so we're going to throw more money at it. Like, we're not going to fix the system. We're not going to get children out of this failing and frankly destructive system. We're just going to throw more money at it. Well, if that was going to work, then there'd be no poverty in Baltimore, and students would be performing at least fourth best anywhere on earth, because that's the kind of funding they're getting. It doesn't work. It never works.
Yeah, I was in Colorado not too long ago, even Arizona, where they started with some programs, and Colorado doesn't have that many school choice programs or options, but they have open enrollment. And what I have seen there is, like you said, the schools that realize I'm going to lose funding got creative. And they're pretty much operating like charter schools. They're customizing their education to attract students to their school, like offering STEM programs or arts or criminal justice, whatever it is, IB programs. And I don't know the number correct. You may know the answer, but in Arizona, with all the options that they have, it's about 55% of the students do not go to their assigned school anymore. And
that sounds about right. We're seeing that across the board. The majority of parents are choosing to send their students to better schools, which, again, why wouldn't they? I'm surprised it's not even higher than that. Of course, you would take your kids to the best performing school. Now, here's the thing, Angela. Sometimes there are going to be cases, and I have a feeling in Baltimore this would happen more than a few times, where some of the schools are so deeply set with failure and rotted from the inside out that they will simply fail, and every student there will go to a better school. Good. That's how it should be, whether it's a government agency, a government department, a private industry, a charity, or whatever else. If you are abjectly failing to be a good steward of the money being given to you and the goals that are set forth for what you're supposed to do, you are completely failing, literally to the point where no one is actually proficient at what you're supposed to be teaching them to be proficient in. You should fail, and the student should go somewhere else.
They should. And I don't want to always say all public schools are bad. They're not. I was one of those parents. I was a single mom, and I used my grandfather's address to enroll my son in another public school that I thought was the better fit. And I know people have been arrested for that. And technically here in Maryland, it's illegal to do so. But we can go on and about that. And that's something actually that I'm going to be back on Saturday morning to talk a lot about educational reform options. Great. Thanks for calling in, Spike. So there you guys have it. Spike Cohen, well-versed on this topic and so much more.